You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably, with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello, once again, to another journey into the unexplored, unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson.
And we've been an unusual show this week, correct?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about an astrologer whose column you probably used to read all the time in the newspaper. Her name was Jeane Dixon, and she actually made quite a name for herself, and we're going to explain a little bit why and what happened with Miss Dixon.
Was she just a columnist, or was there something else about her?
Oh, no, there was something else about her.
You're going to save it as a mystery until after we get there.
I'm going to talk about it when we get to the show. Yeah, but
right.
But if you look up Jeane Dixon, then you'll find out. But otherwise, you can stay here and listen, and we're happy to explain a little bit more.
Ooh, you know, in our show, it's going to have something. Either she's a Bigfoot, an alien, or something else.
Or an extra special newspaper astrologer.
Oh,
how's that?
Okay. A gift, if you will.
Yeah, a gift. So we'll talk about why.
So right now we're in the middle of San Francisco's very brief heat wave.
Yes, and it's the day after 4th of July, and last night the whole neighborhood was acting like it was a huge round of fireworks, but
I know, right?
I don't know where they were coming from.
It's like they built it up for a few years and like, let's blow everything up in 1 year.
They were going on all night. And
Yeah.
I thought, either it's coming from the places like near Fisherman's Wharf where they do fireworks or Chrissy
over
Fields.
the bay, yeah.
Or it's somewhere in the neighborhood and I can't see it.
Yeah, there was fog all around too, so I couldn't see anything. I just heard it.
I'm sure people with their dogs, and there's lots of dogs around here, the dogs hated it.
Yeah, traditionally on the waterfronts, though, in the bay, you get a lot of fog, so you get colored, fluffy clouds.
Sure. Well, I couldn't see the fireworks, but I certainly heard them.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, happy 5th of July, then.
Happy 5th of July. That's correct. Yeah.
All right, so do you want to do the paranormal news?
Let's go for it.
All right, let's do it. Okay, and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal News. What have you got this week, Berna?
I have an article about a woman who claims that she was walking down a street and she had a time slip. We've actually covered this.
We have.
We've covered this subject before.
Remember the Versailles time slip episode we did?
Yeah, with Kathleen
In
McGowan.
front?
Yeah, and that was an interesting one. Well, this woman, she claims that she had that there was a time slip when she walked down a UK high street, and that doesn't surprise me. You know, England, old buildings.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's a lot of energy spots around England, even in towns and villages.
If only they could find the Druids to ask where.
Well, go to the stone circles. I'm sure some of their spirits are hanging around.
That's probably where some happened.
Probably. And this came actually from the Mirror. This is where a lot of people talk about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Her name was Julie French, and she was in her 20s when she was walking along Bold Street in Liverpool. And she said she suddenly slipped back in time and she saw people wearing 1940s clothes and old-fashioned motor cars rolling along the road. And she said that she experienced a time slip in which she traveled 60 years into the past while walking along a busy high street. So she says she walked past a bookstore on Liverpool's Bold Street, and suddenly the shop front transformed into an old-fashioned department store with 1940s handbags and shoes in the shop, and in the shop window. And she's now in her 50s, but she was in her 20s at the time. And she explained how she did a double take, thinking that it must have been a war-related promotion.
So if she's in her 50s and it was 30 years ago, so that would put her into like the 90s, 1990s.
Something like that, yeah. And she said, but when I looked down at the floor, the pavement seemed to go darker. I turned around, and as I looked up Bold Street, I saw about 12 or 13 people walking by, all dressed in 1940s coats and hats. And what was even more significant was on the day it happened in June 1996. So it was 1996 when this happened.
90s, yeah.
She said it was warm, and I was wearing a T-shirt and jeans, but the people on the street seemed to be in the cold. And she recalled hearing the sputtering of an old-fashioned car, which was complete with the period round side mirrors. And she then heard it honking its horn as it went towards her. And she said that even though the street was supposed to be a pedestrian street, so she says she walked inside the shop where she was served again by a woman draped in a 1940s style garb. And she turned to the bookcase, which had the word Dillon's written on it, before a man grabbed her by the arm, and she slipped back to 1996. So I
wonder how long that was then. Sounds like at least 5 minutes.
Well, at least 5 minutes. So she believed that she experienced a time slip where people suddenly have been whisked away to points in the past or the future at the same location.
Yeah.
So,
how bizarre.
Yeah. So anyway, she's from what other people have talked about. A man named Danny Robbins. He hosts a podcast called Uncanny, and he documents paranormal incidents on his show, just like us. He said that it isn't uncommon to have that. He said that I received a great story about somebody who walked out of the Oxford branch of HMV in the 1990s and saw the London street as it was in the Victorian period. They witnessed horse-drawn carriages and cobbled streets and even experienced the smells of Victorian London.
Ew.
He said, how do you explain that? I know.
Ew.
And he said, is it a glitch in someone's mind, or is it a moment where they're generally coming back in a strange...
I would call that time stank.
Linda, my sister.
No, I've never heard of her.
I know.
Did they see her in London in Victorian era?
Well, no, she used to experience a time slip when she was living around the corner from me. She was living around the corner from me in this apartment over on Sacramento Street. And she said every once in a while she would hear a coach with horses walking by her window, and she would hear it loud. And everyone kind of had a hard time believing her, but the people who knew her believed her because they knew Linda. But she asked me one day to come over and watch.
Such a drunk. No. Just kidding.
Linda will love you for that.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Linda. I didn't mean it.
She invited me one day to come to her house to watch a movie. And she told me, she said, she said, around 8 o'clock is when you're going to hear that sound. And I said, okay. So we were watching the movie, and she turned it down. And then suddenly I really heard it. I heard the horse and the coach, and I heard the clopping and the wheels. And I'm going, oh my gosh, Linda, you're right. I heard it loud and clear with her.
Now, since we're on this topic, because this is one we liked before.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call that time travel.
No, not.
I call it somebody who's walked into a time bubble from the past.
Right. That's why they called it a time slip.
I think it's location, it's energy, it's atmospheric. Sometimes it could keep happening in the same place.
Right.
But I thought what's fascinating about this story is she was wearing shorts in the summer and she ended up in the winter.
Right. And she walked into the shop because she thought it was interesting, like, oh, there's a promotion going on.
I guess I didn't notice it. Maybe it didn't happen. Did anyone acknowledge her, or was it she just walked into the shop?
She said a woman. She said she was served by a woman in 1940s clothes.
See, that's interesting. That's interaction with. So it's not exactly a time bubble for her then. Because
No.
a time bubble is you see and witness, but nothing interacts with you. Do you know what I mean?
What I found was interesting was she was served by somebody in 1940s gear, but
Yeah.
didn't they notice that she looked a little out of place?
Well, maybe you wouldn't really say anything. Like, why are you dressed so weird? How can I help you?
Right, she's a customer, so
Yeah,
they're
you
so
wouldn't
they're not
say
going to
that.
say anything. Yeah.
Yeah, but you think you'd say, "Oh, aren't you a little cold, dear?"
Right, because it's winter.
winter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's different. The fact that she had an interaction means it could be portal, could be time portal,
Right.
as opposed to a time bubble. I believe there are time bubbles with, like Linda, you said with the apartment. I think that's a time bubble.
That's a time
I
bubble,
think
but
you're hearing things from that time in the same
Right.
spot.
in the same spot.
Yeah.
But what I wonder is if this woman, if she bothered to walk down that street again, was she going to get that again, or it's just
Like
that
the
one
same time of day, the same time of
Yeah.
year, just to see if it
Or-
happens again.
Yeah, or is
Or
it
any
just,
other time.
or was it just that one time? Yeah.
So many questions.
I'd love to hear more about time slips because
Maybe you can get her on the show.
because
Maybe we
the
can just
fact
have
that
her
I
on the show.
experienced a time bubble a few times, not
Yeah.
just with that one time with Linda,
Yeah.
but I've experienced it a couple other times too. But I'm not going to talk about them here. But I'd
And
like
I've already
to find
told
out.
you mine, where I've recorded like the Queen Anne Hotel with the Mary Lake School for
You
Girls.
told me that,
where I
yeah.
recorded a time bubble.
yeah,
but
time
it
bubble.
But it did acknowledge me.
Right.
I didn't know it because I had to play it back later, but they acknowledged me while I was recording. So that's interesting.
That is interesting. So I'd like to find out why and when it happens and why. And does it have to do something with us? Does it have to do something with us, though? Are there times in our lives when we're a little more sensitive than other times and we're picking up on things too?
Yeah, well, that could be one of the factors. Your own energy, your
Right.
own mood, your aura, maybe in fluctuation as far as the vibration with whatever's around you.
Mm-hmm.
She could have been upset. She could have been thinking about something else. And
Right.
it was enough energy that thrust her into that.
Thrust her into that,
moment.
yeah.
It didn't sound, like I said, very
Yeah.
long, but definitely was something there.
I'd like to hear from the listeners if they've had any time slips. We'd like to hear about it
Oh,
because
absolutely.
I love the stories that come from it
Yeah.
because
it's fascinating.
It shows that it's a phenomenon, but it's
Yeah.
one that we'd like to study more and find out,
Yep.
why and what are some of the factors of it. Yeah.
Yep, I agree. All right. Now, I got an interesting story about a dead woman who was found alive at a funeral home.
Oh my,
Yeah.
that happens more than you think.
I know it does. I hear about people like that all
Sadly,
the time.
it does.
So this woman was from Nebraska, and she was at a nursing home, and they thought she was dead. Mm-hmm. And she was 74 years old. She was declared dead. And the staff at the local funeral home, brought 2 hours later, found that she was still breathing, and they performed CPR on her. So she was quickly taken to the hospitals, but she was later declared dead for a second time soon after. So police are investigating the incident, but they say there's no evidence of criminal intent by the nursing home. They said it's a very rare, unusual case. This is in Lancaster County. They've been doing this for 31 years, and nothing like that has ever gotten to that point before. Coroner said that was sent to the nursing home after it declared her dead because the woman had been placed in hospice care, and the circumstances didn't really fall within the coroner's job. But her death had been much anticipated because she's old. A physician,
She was in hospice, of course.
Yeah, and a
Of course it
physician
was
had seen her in the last 7 days, and the physician was willing to sign the death certificate, and there was nothing suspicious at the time of her death. But around 4 o'clock local time, she was pronounced dead for a second time. They also said that the post-mortem examination had been scheduled later on Tuesday, but the results could take up to 12 weeks. The funeral home did absolutely nothing wrong, they said. They are the ones who found that she was still alive.
Yeah, but don't they keep them like in a cold place or something? I mean, how could the body survive?
Well, but if she passed
Ew.
out, if she was like passed out and her heartbeat slowed, they might have kept her somewhere cold. But she was like almost like she was asleep, in a deep sleep.
Oh yeah, but still.
The BBC contacted the funeral parlor, Butheris, Mazer, and Love Funeral Home, and they had a statement. We're proud that our directors and staff handled the recent incident in the news appropriately and with utmost care. Of course, she's the only person to be pronounced dead to reveal themselves as still being alive. Yeah, I mean, there was another woman in June of last year.
Uh-huh.
76-year-old Bella Montoya in Ecuador was declared dead following a suspected stroke, placed in a coffin, taken to a funeral parlor for a vigil ahead of her burial. 5 hours later, she was found to be alive after the coffin was opened to change her clothes. She did, however, die days later. How horrible. It's like dying twice.
Well, okay, now the first one in Nebraska, she was not dead after all, but...
No, but then she did die.
Okay, she did die.
They moved her to hospice after they found out she was alive, and then she died.
And then the second one died too.
Yeah. Almost the same scenario.
Well, geez, I mean, if your body's put through that much trauma and it's not dead yet.
Especially if you're that old and you're expected to die.
It's like, okay, it's
Crazy.
almost like the body finally said, okay, I'm going to do it finally.
Yeah.
But
in 2018,
it's kind of sad.
A South African woman was initially declared dead following a road accident and was discovered alive in a mortuary fridge. This goes with what you just said.
Oh, yeah.
The doctor said the such cases are rare, but death is a process. Sometimes somebody may look like they're dead, but they're not quite dead. Careful examination is necessary. I would hope.
I would hope so too.
And he added the doctors would
Jeez.
often look for heart sounds or breathing effort or, at least a minute before declaring someone's dead. And that some drugs could slow down the body processes, like I said, the heart, giving someone the false appearance of having passed away. So there you go.
You know that old that old custom of burying somebody and putting a bell there so that in case they're really not dead, they can ring the bell.
Oh yeah.
Maybe they should put that in.
Or where they tie the string to the bell into the grave so they can ring it.
Maybe they should, instead of taking them away. I've seen, unfortunately,
maybe wrap it around their wrist or something.
Something. Yeah,
Ding,
maybe
ding,
they need to bring it back.
Hey, I know you got me in this box, and I'm in the freezer with all the frozen peas, but I'm not
Ding,
dead.
ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
I mean, really? I mean, you have to.
Oh my God.
Well, if they heard that, they're going to bring him out.
Or you lock the freezer and we'll go home.
No kidding.
Yep. All right, so that was the paranormal news.
I guess so.
All right, and that was the paranormal news. So what's the mystery behind Jeane Dixon? She's an astrologer, you said. What else?
She's an astrologer, but she was an astrologer who was famous for predicting JFK's assassination long before it happened. And actually, when it happened, people went back to the article where she predicted that a Democrat would win the 1960 presidential election, but he would be assassinated or die in office, though not necessarily in his first term.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah. So when it happened...
Was she on the grassy knoll that day? No, just kidding.
Well, when it happened, I think she was known as an astrologer before that, but when that happened...
But she was a columnist too, though,
She was a columnist too, but when that happened, people all of a sudden remembered the article and they started talking about it.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
She was a columnist. Was she like a Dear Abby type columnist?
No,
or did she just write a columnist?
She had a long running syndicated newspaper astrology column.
So she would write about astrology,
and I used to see the column,
and then
I
she
used
would
to
have
see it all the time.
She would add astrology predictions with that.
Yeah,
I must have seen it. I just don't remember.
I used to see it all the time
Yeah.
In the San Jose Mercury
I'm sure she was
News.
syndicated.
Oh,
across
she
the
was.
country, yeah.
I would see her picture, her smiling with her little hairdo, and they said Jeane Dixon, tells you what's going to happen this week, and I would look under Virgo and think, oh, that's what's going to happen this week.
You know what? I think I do remember now because I would
Yeah.
check my astrology. I always check my horoscope.
Right. And you know what I used to notice about these horoscope astrologers is that sometimes they actually had some stuff they were picking up. They weren't just being silly. Some of them actually had something going on that was a little bit better than just somebody wanting to entertain
Like
you.
Confucius says, astrology.
Right.
You know what's funny though is how many people we both probably know a lot of people who say they don't believe in astrology or horoscopes,
Right.
but who used to look at their horoscope
of
every
course
day in the paper.
Of course they did.
They didn't believe in it, but they sure as heck checked the paper every day.
Of course they did. So
Just in case.
So let's talk about who Jeane Dixon was. She
Okay.
was born Lydia Pinkert in Medford, Wisconsin in 1904. She said that she was born in 1918, but actually it was 1904.
Oh.
And she said that she was always gifted with psychic ability since childhood. And she grew up in California. And in 1939, she married James Dixon. And the couple moved to Washington, D.C., I think it was back in the 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
And they both ran a business. I think it was a real estate business. And she started she started a career as a psychic. I think I'm not sure how she started that career, but she became known as the Seeress of Washington, and she collected a lot of high-profile friends during that time. Some of the clients were Ronald and Nancy Reagan.
Which I think you've talked to about
that. Yeah.
This week's podcast. That just
Right.
aired
And
last.
Nancy, we all know that Nancy used to rely on psychics.
Yeah.
Well, she later abandoned Jeane Dixon for Joan Quigley, who
Traitor.
yeah, really, and who actually was an astrologer who lived here in San Francisco. So Jeane Dixon actually met also with President Nixon in 1971, and she would send the president national security forecast through his secretary, Rosemary Woods. And one message actually got Nixon upset. It was about Palestinian terrorists. And it got Nixon upset enough to speak about it with Henry Kissinger, his national security advisor. Yeah. So he mentioned to Kissinger that they're desperate, that the terrorists will kidnap somebody and they may shoot someone, and they got to have a plan. So based on that, he ordered Kissinger to set up a counterterrorism committee, which I think is still in effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was also and Dixon was also familiar with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who allowed her to use confidential material in her public speeches, which I don't know why he did, but he did. So anyway, she ran a column. She wrote several books, and which I wouldn't mind taking a look at, because astrology is a science, and if somebody is good at what they're doing and they're continually doing it, it might be worth it just to take a look under your sign, what she had to say about it. Yeah. And I think she died in 1997 at age 93, and after her death, her financial advisor opened a museum dedicated to her, and it was some interesting stuff about that museum. I think they were selling things to do with Jeane Dixon in that museum, but she wrote some books, including a book about her cat called Mike the Magi Cat, who she said had ESP, which doesn't surprise me. I've had some pretty psychic animals that I've lived with. My cat Paris, who just passed away, was a very psychic cat and would also accompany me whenever I did tarot readings with friends. And she also collaborated with Milton Bradley on a game called Jeane Dixon's Game of Destiny, which I'd like to find.
We should look into that.
We should look into that, yeah. And she continued to stay
we could do TikTok lives with that.
Right. And she also claimed that some of her predictions are interesting. She claimed that the Antichrist had been born in the Middle East in 1962. And she told Americans to give up their materialistic ways before it was too late. And
what?
Yeah.
Stop buying Blu-rays? Jeane Dixon, you're crazy. But
really?
You're dead, so that's okay.
I know. I buy too many books.
She's dead. She don't know.
And she also claimed that the world would end around 2020 because of a nuclear war.
Well,
you know what's interesting about that, and this is something I thought about. You know, when you're a psychic, you'll see something, and you're seeing something, but you are interpreting what you're seeing. She could have saw the pandemic, and mistaken it for a nuclear war because she saw
It's
a lot
possible.
of death. That's what I was wondering.
Or she saw the pandemic and the nuclear war is on the horizon, because that's been getting heated up lately.
Yeah, I know, unfortunately. Yeah. So, also, she survived a financial scandal in the 1970s when the media reported that her charity, Children for Children, spent most of its funds on salaries and promotion with little going to the children, going to its cause.
Oh.
She probably had to pay people, I'm sure she didn't mean it. I don't know. And, and she, so anyway, she died, as I mentioned, she died of a heart attack in 1997, and she requested that her ashes would be scattered on Mount Rainier in Washington State. And, they had a museum dedicated to her, and the museum,
Where's the museum
It was
at?
in
Do we know?
Strasbourg, Virginia. It opened
Okay.
in 2002, and it closed 6 years later when her friend died, Leo Bernstein.
Oh.
Yeah, and the collection from the museum went up for auction, which included designer hats and Mike the Magic Cat's rhinestone collars and other things, that were from the museum. I'd like to see some of the stuff, frankly, but anyway. That's about Jeane Dixon, and she sounds like an interesting lady, actually.
Well, if you can track down some of those books.
I'd like to track down the game.
Or the game, yeah.
Yeah.
What was it? Jeane Dixon's?
It was from Bradley, from Milton Bradley.
Milton Bradley? Does it say what year?
Let me. I think it was Game of Destiny, Milton Bradley. It didn't say what year it came out, actually.
We'll have to look that up. Probably the 60s or 70s.
Yeah,
I guess.
But here's my take on it: is I've had friends who were astrologers and who have written books and articles.
Yeah.
And they take their science of astrology very seriously. And I think that
Well, a lot of astronomers will poo-poo astrology.
and then a lot of astronomers do, but then I met a lot of astronomers who feel that there's something to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for her to take that much responsibility and be friends with a lot of political people, she probably had to really study her stuff and had to make sure that she wasn't just...
There must be an FBI file on her somewhere.
Possibly.
CIA.
If she's in touch with political people and she's
Giving them advice.
hey, they contacted her and they took her seriously
It
enough
doesn't
to
mean
talk
our
to her.
government wasn't keeping track of all that.
Of course not, but they took her seriously enough
Yeah.
to be in touch with her. If they thought she was just some silly lady, predicting your horoscope for the next week in the newspaper, I don't think they would have gone out of their way for her.
Yeah.
So I think she was probably trying to do a lot of good, and she probably took a lot of responsibility for what she was doing. But there's always going to be people who are going to dismiss you and not believe in it. And
Well, there's a lot of people out there who used to read the daily horoscopes, so they can't say they didn't.
right. And I know people who didn't believe in astrology. They still read their horoscope.
Of course they did, because it's fun.
It's just for fun, so
Unless it's bad, they're like, well, that's never going to happen. Then you could tell they believed it, because they're upset. That's never going to happen.
yeah, I've heard people say that, or I've heard people say things like, oh, they're talking about everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know how many people read that newspaper, the horoscope?
It's for everybody, that doesn't necessarily mean it's for me.
But yet you'll check back tomorrow.
You'll check back, right? So, I think astrologers can go either way.
Yeah.
But I think somebody like her who had a lot of responsibility, I think she took her job very seriously, and she probably was very good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Hey, she had a museum for 6 years?
Something like that, yeah. And
pretty good.
and she had a lot of friends and people who believed in her. So,
There you go.
yeah.
All right, folks. That's this week's episode of Ecto Portal. And until next week, we'll say goodbye.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden. Be sure to visit us at www.ectoportal.com. Check out our archives on YouTube and head on over for new episodes to ectoportal.podbean.com.